Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Araza. I am a professor and current dean at the School of Church Communications at Santa Croce University in Rome, one of the Vatican universities. It's a pleasure to welcome to all of you and all the participants to this webinar. This webinar entitled, as you know, Leo XIV, the North and South American Pope. Very original title that will be explained during the conversation that we'll have this afternoon. This afternoon in Rome. I don't know exactly what time is in your cities, in your towns, but this afternoon in Rome. And the webinar has been organized by our school, the School of Church Communications at Santa Croce, and our Sunday visitor. For those of you who don't know, the School of Church Communications here at Santa Croce is focused on the formation of institutional communicators. So people working for communications in church institutions and non-profit organizations, and also dedicated to the formation of journalists that cover religion and particularly the Catholic Church. Journalists that are maybe working as Vaticanist here in Rome or come to Rome for covering events in the Vatican or follow the church, the Catholic Church from their own towns and cities around the world. Our Sunday visitor is a Catholic publishing company based in Indiana in the US. And among its different operations and activities, OSB runs a news agency focused precisely on news on the Catholic Church in the US and also around the globe, and particularly in Rome. And between our both institutions, Santa Croce and our Sunday visitor, there is certainly a clear convergence of interests in helping to improve the professional level of religion journalism and help media and journalists in general to cover religion in an efficient and correct way in general, religion in general, but particularly focused on the Catholic Church and the Vatican. And for that reason, we have organized since 2008, so we are now almost 26 years since our beginning, a biannual seminar in Rome under the name of the Church Up Close, precisely. And we'll have the next one in September 2026. Maybe I will ask Raven, who is one of the assistants of the program, if you can share with us the screen of the information of the coming seminar, the Church Up Close 2026, covering Catholicism in the Age of Leo XIV, that will take place in September 7 to 12 here in Rome. You can find all the information about the seminar in the website that you can see on the screen. Church, how do you say church/communication.net. If you have any question, please write us an email to churchupclose@pusk.it. And the webinar precisely today, the webinar that we have today is the occasion to launch also this coming presidential seminar in September. And then going directly to the focus of the webinar, you all probably agree that at least from a journalistic point of view, we're in a very interesting moment. This time with the new Pope, Leo XIV. Certainly in great continuity, at least for many things, with his predecessors. Francis, the last one, but also very different in many aspects. And in that sense, we call this a new era, the era of Pope Leo XIV. And this is the name of the webinar or the seminar that we'll have in September, and certainly the topic that we'll talk today. And to do this, we have invited, and we have with us, two experts, precisely to understand better this particular moment in the church and in society. You can see on the screen Father John Wauck, professor of literature at Santa Croce. He's original from Chicago, so don't worry if my English is not good, his English is good. Father John has been in Rome now for more than 30 years, so really he's an expert in church and Vatican communications and Vatican issues. And in fact, he has been also maybe you can expand on that, John, afterwards in your experience, no? In a commentator for the ABC News, no? For the ABC network during the last two conclaves, no? So certainly the expertise that you have can be very helpful for all the participants today. And Father John will be in dialogue with Gretchen Crowe. Hello, Gretchen. She's in the US, so we are wrong. You are there in Indiana, I guess. Gretchen is the editor-in-chief or our Sunday visitor. She also has a great expertise covering the Catholic Church. She has been working for OSB now for many years. I prefer that maybe you tell us something afterwards about OSB and complete this presentation. No? Maybe before giving you the microphone, just two technical aspects or two technical elements for the participants to the webinar. No? This webinar, the idea is that it will last around 1 hour, 1 hour and 20 minutes in total. So the idea is to have now, following my presentation or my introduction, a conversation between Gretchen and Father John of around 30-40 minutes maximum, with the idea of getting the insights from both of them. So during the conversation, we'll just focus on this dialogue. We have many people registered for the seminar, more than 200 people, so it certainly is impossible to answer all the questions and all the doubts that people may have, no? So those of you who are interested can send the questions to the Q&A link or bottom. There is a section on usually at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A. You can write there your question or your comment, and we'll try to bring up these comments at the end. Some of them, probably we cannot cover all of them, but we'll try to answer some of them at the end. And certainly at the end, we'll put again the screen with the website of the webinar that we'll have in September that we think that is useful, considering that since today, the registrations for the Church of Close seminar are open and you are all invited to apply. With this said, I will silence myself and I will cancel also my image so that everybody can focus on the conversation between Gretchen and Father John. Thank you so much. Gretchen, the microphone is yours.
Daniel, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm really pleased to be here with you all this morning in the US, this afternoon in Rome, or wherever you are. I have the great privilege of being editor-in-chief of OSV News. We are just entering our 4th year of being a newswire and covering the Catholic Church globally. Of course, with a special focus on the Vatican, especially with our American Pope. So there's so much to talk about today, and I'm very much looking forward to getting into the conversation with Father John. I have a very unique privilege too of coming at this conversation from my position now with OSV News, but also as an alumna of the Church Up Close program. So I attended the first such gathering back in 2008, and so very pleased to be able to continue to support this program from OSV's perspective. It is one that truly made the Vatican come alive for me as a young journalist, and it continues to do so today. So I'm also very much looking forward to the program in September under this new pontificate. There's always so much to learn and every day. So really pleased to be here and looking forward to having this conversation. Father John, thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to see you. And I just wanted to know, what are your thoughts as we enter into this 9th month of having a new pontificate?
Well, I mean, I think we could start the conversation simply by reflecting on a few of the things that make Pope Leo unique. This is a new era. What is new about it? And there's a number of things that immediately jump to mind about Pope Leo that distinguish him from popes of the past. One, I think, some of them are closely related one to the other. One is simply the fact that we have a pope who was a missionary, right, who dedicated his life to missionary work, ended up becoming the head of his religious order and a bishop, but the beginning of his life was spent as a missionary, leaving home, getting out into going to Peru to preach the gospel, right? To learn a new language, learn a new culture. That's not something we've seen for a long, long time. Obviously, you could say St. Peter was a missionary pope, right? But certainly in recent times, we haven't seen anything quite like that. As I say, closely related to that is his being, and this is part of the title of this conversation, a North and South American Pope, that he is truly a citizen of the world. I think we've become accustomed to popes being citizens of the world, certainly ever since John Paul II, right? Popes taking trips, traveling all over the place. That's become the norm for popes since John Paul II. But in this case, we have a pope who's already done that before he was pope. That he grew up in the United States, lived most of his adult life outside of the United States, in Peru and in Rome. And when he was in Rome as the head of the Augustinians, he was traveling all over the world, visiting the different houses of the Augustinians. And he was already a globetrotter well before he became pope. So that is another thing that's kind of unique. If you think, John Paul II was mostly stuck in Poland in the communist era, and Benedict was in Germany and Rome, and Pope Francis was in Argentina. They weren't all over the world before they became pope, and yet in this case we have someone who is already familiar with many parts of the world. Again, related to that, I would say, is the linguistic phenomenon of this papacy, which is something we haven't seen before either, an English-speaking pope. And it happens that English is the most spoken language in the world, right? In the other language that he knows, as his sort of almost native language, is Spanish, which is the second most spoken native tongue, because English is spoken by many people for whom it's not their native tongue. That's why it's the most spoken language in the world. But after Mandarin Chinese, Spanish is the most spoken native tongue. And and of course, the other language in the mix is Hindu, Urdu, right? But Chinese and Urdu aren't Christian they don't correspond to Christian populations for the most part, obviously. Whereas English and Spanish, cover a huge part of the Catholic and Christian world. And he's completely at home in both of those languages. And as I say, for the first time, an English speaking pope. He's very sensitive to language, and we'll get into that, I hope, in this conversation, because there's a few signs, I think, that this could be part of his program as a pope. The other thing that's obviously important about his identity, his unique identity, is being an Augustinian. And for people outside of the church, sometimes I think it's hard to see what being a member of a religious order means, how thoroughly that shapes a person's life and vision. And it certainly does and we've seen it in the case of Pope Francis, who was a Jesuit, and we're seeing it already in the case of Pope Leo and his Augustinian formation. And the motto of the papacy is taken from St. Augustine, etc. And he quotes St. Augustine almost every time he opens his mouth. So the profound identity, Augustinian identity of the Pope is key. I think also the fact that simply Leo XIII as a point of reference, the fact that he chose that name and explicitly said because of Leo XIII, and I think it invites us to look closely at Leo XIII in order to understand Leo XIV. And the last point I would make is simply generational in the terms of his being the first post World War II Pope. A Pope born in the 50s. If I'm not mistaken, there's a song by the Police born in the 50s. This Pope grew up listening to rock and roll, basically. This is, he's from that generation. And also he's the first Pope who is basically secular, university educated Pope. Went to Villanova. I imagine he rooted for the Wildcats. Everyone talks about him being a White Sox fan in Chicago, but I'm sure he went to the Wildcats basketball games and he studied math at a regular university with regular classmates and everything, which is, again, not something we've seen in probably any pope, frankly, in the history of the papacy. So those are few things I think that are important to keep in mind, considering the sort of uniqueness of the Pope, the sort of missionary citizen of the world who's speaks multiple languages fluently, is an Augustinian and a follower of Leo XIII, and a child of a very recent generation.
It's such a great overview and great perspective, I think, as we get into this conversation. I would love to dig more into his Augustinian background because, like you said, he quotes Augustine all the time. He has such a deep heart for the Augustinian order. So,
Right.
I'd love to know what are you seeing? How is he referencing Augustine? How is he letting his roots in this order really form his papacy so far?
Well, I mean, I think it's a great gift to the church. I hope that the Holy Spirit is behind it, that the Holy Spirit wants us to have a pope immersed in St. Augustine, who is one of the greatest minds of the West, one of the greatest. I teach literature, and so one of the greatest writers as well of Western civilization. And he provides a perspective and a way of expressing it that is exceptional. And to have a pope for whom these ideas and these forms of expression, St. Augustine's words, are sort of second nature, is a great gift, I think, to the church. It also, I think, it encourages him to take a long view, I would say, of the magisterium of the church, the teaching of the church, right? Considering Augustine as a point of reference. If you're looking to Augustine today, it means you're not sort of being persuaded by the latest fads, right? You are thinking of Augustine and all of that Augustine has meant in the life of the church for all of these centuries. And that gives you a sensitivity, I think, to the tradition of the church, the sense of history and of culture, because Augustine was a great analyst, right, of history and culture, above all, in his work, The City of God, right? And we are, as I say, we're blessed to have a pope who is so immersed in that. And as I see, he's explicitly referencing from St. Augustine from the very beginning. And we've already seen, I think, in the case of Pope Francis, right, a pope who was a member of a religious order, but the relationship of Pope Francis, who was very deeply Jesuit, is a little bit different. He wasn't quoting Saint Ignatius as much as we're hearing Pope Leo quoting Saint Augustine, is explicitly, being offered as a guide, right, for today's world. And in the case of Pope Francis, it was a little bit more implicit, just as forceful, I would say, but not as explicit. I think there's a beautiful thing that Pope Leo said to the journalists, like one of the very first meetings he had with the journalist, quoting St. Augustine. This is for all you journalists who are listening. And he said, in some way, communication and journalism do not exist outside of time and history. St. Augustine reminds us of this when he said, let us live well, and the times will be good. We are the times. Right? It's a call to conversion, and the conversion of the sort that will change the world. We are the times. We make the times. and he was saying it to the journalists. So it's a challenge for all of us, I think.
Yes, yes, indeed. And Augustine is also famous for his comments of, what are the most essential teachings of Jesus on the morality of Jesus, and he said humility, humility, humility. And
Right.
I think to have Pope Leo stand at the loggia on the day he was elected and say, "I'm a son of Augustine,"
Right.
and to say, to quote, "With you, I'm a Christian; for you, I'm a bishop." The famous line from Augustine.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What does that say to you about his Pope Leo's own way of being, his own what we might see, what we have seen from him, I think, over the last for several months, and what we might see from him in the future? How is he comporting himself? How is he using maybe what Augustine is putting forth in in the charism of the Augustinians to
Yeah.
his own behavior?
I don't know. I don't know if if it's humility or what, but it certainly is apparent that he doesn't seem to have any need to attract attention to himself. Obviously, there's the attention being given to him constantly as Pope, but I think he's very comfortable being reticent and being, and listening and finding out when he was here with the cardinals and, at the consistory recently. That's how I think he understands his role as a source of unity, a point of reference, but not as a necessarily the protagonist, that he doesn't need to be the center of action. And I think that's an extremely healthy and very Augustinian uh, approach to the papacy, really.
I agree with you. And I think, another element that we're seeing frequently from Pope Leo is an emphasis on unity. And certainly
Yeah.
we saw that in his inaugural Mass homily later on, a couple of weeks after he was elected. I was able to be there. I was there for the entire conclave and was at that Mass. And, it was just a beautiful, I thought, outpouring of hope and renewal, I think, for the church at a time, when we're so divided. And I speak coming from the United States, the church in the United States especially is divided and polemical. And to be able to hear such great emphasis put on unity in the church, it really seems like that's a significant part of his program. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, there's no question. I mean, it's hard to talk about a program of this papacy, I think, just yet. In many ways, we're only just beginning. But if you had to pick something safe to refer to, I think it would be the theme of unity. Obviously, he picked the motto of the papacy from Augustine, in illo uno unum, which is about unity and it's about Christ. The one in whom we are one is Jesus Christ. So it's very Christocentric, but it's also a statement about the church, right? It's the person of Christ, and we are united in Christ. It's not necessarily about, being on the same page and every point, but we are one in Christ. And we start with that. I think part of the work of unity that we already have seen in his papacy has to do with, one, he's a famously good listener. And the people I know who have spoken with or worked with him, even before he was a pope, all mentioned that. It was one of the things people who agreed with him and people who did not agree with him, said he was a very good listener. And I think that's a way of building unity, is being receptive to others. I also think something that we have seen that maybe is a part of a program, we could say, is his decision to do the Wednesday catecheses on Vatican II and on the texts of Vatican II. Because the texts of Vatican II belong to everyone. The interpretation, what some people refer to as the spirit of Vatican II, right, is much debated and a source of disunity in that sense, or at least a variety of views. But the texts are the texts, right? And he's doing a commentary on the texts, something that we can all agree we have in common. And I think that is a programmatic way of reinforcing the unity of the church.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, he started that series of catecheses in early January, and it really, I think, truly is a gift to the church to be able to say,
Yeah.
let's anchor, the church is teaching on the teachings of the Second Vatican Council and those documents which continue to reveal how important they are in today's world. And so I think the modern day application of those documents is going to continue to grow. And I think I agree with you, as you say, it's another opportunity to kind of bring people together and find a commonality among differences.
Yeah.
Um, I want to go back to what you said about, a pope that is a missionary, because as you said, he was globetrotting before he was even pope, and
Yeah.
certainly as the head of the Augustinian order and traveling the world. How do you think that that has formed him? How has that shaped him?
Well, part of it, I think, has to do with what we're talking about is the North and South American Pope. He has an international perspective on the church, on the church in its many cultural, situations and the difficulties that are being faced in Asia and Africa and Latin America and North America and Europe. All of those places have very different challenges. And he's aware of that through what it's fair to say, an Augustinian lens, right? He was bishop, obviously, in Peru, so he has a very keen sense of the situation there in Latin America. He's from the United States. So he has a deeper sense of the dynamic in the United States. And through his, work for the Augustinian order, he inevitably has picked up a sense of what is going on in all of the church in the as I say African and Asia and Europe as well. Also, obviously, his work in the dicastery for bishops, right, is also international by definition. And you're looking at who could be a bishop in this place. What are the characteristics we need? That's a great preparation for being pope. No question.
I think we really saw that come to life a couple times, but he gave a lengthy speech to the diplomatic corps in
Right.
January, which has been, if I encourage anybody on the call, if you haven't read it, I really think it's a great one to go back and read and spend some time with, because it gives a depth it shows. I think Pope Leo's depth of understanding of the world as he's speaking to these ambassadors. So, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that speech as well, Father John.
Well, I mean, I think it does reflect the confidence with which he can speak uh, to the diplomatic corps in this case, but people all over the world. That he's not a newcomer to their situation or their country or their continent or their cultural context. I found the speech very interesting. Obviously, some of that speech is the kind of thing that you expect in a speech to the diplomatic corps, talking about human rights and religious freedom, migrants and poverty and peace, topics that are fairly standard, right? We could say. I was also struck by his references to Leo the 13th. Again, that he worked Leo the 13th, and in that speech is one of the places where he says, I explicitly chose the name thinking of Leo the 13th, talking about the new era that we're living in. So, and again, I mentioned St. Augustine as having this historical vision. And I think the Pope, being an Augustinian, being a child of Augustine, has that vision that we are living in a new era. And he referred in that context to Rerum Novarum, the new things, which is the famous social encyclical of Leo the 13th, talking about the changes in society in the 19th century. A lot of it had to do with political ideology, with the transformation of industrialization, the workforce, divisions in society, etc. And he's saying we're living through a different kind of new era, and he's very sensitive to the impact of that. Particularly, he's talked about, remarkably quite a bit about artificial intelligence and where we are headed. Uh, and the impact that will have on work, on human activity and society. So he's, as I say, the son of Augustine, also in that sense of having a very big picture before him, very aware of that. One of the other striking things I thought about that speech, and particularly the reference to Leo XIII's encyclical, is that with the diplomats, he stressed something that I wasn't expecting to hear uh, that kind of audience, which was that in the Rerum Novarum, the Pope doesn't only talk about work and the problems of the workers. It's an encyclical that talks a great deal about socialism. And at one point, the Pope quotes to the diplomats what, in fact, I think it's the only thing that he quotes from Rerum Novarum in that speech. The only direct quote is about the family. And in that context, he says, remember, the government has a responsibility to build society, right? And to build society, you have to support the family, which is a real and true society and prior, right? It comes before any civil society, which is a very challenging thing to say to a bunch of diplomats who tend not to see things that quite in those terms. They're thinking about states and their interrelations, but he's saying the first society is the family, and it's the one that the other ones depend on. So that was a very interesting moment in that speech, I thought.
We thought the same thing, and we covered at OSV News. We covered the speech in its entirety, but we did do a separate pullout on his comments on family life because they were so striking, particularly in that context. And
Yeah,
I think we can learn a lot about him from that.
yeah.
I want to go back a little bit to you mentioned AI and artificial intelligence, and
No,
this is not Pope Leo has not been quiet on this topic since his election. And the most substantive thing we've had so far is his World Communications Day message released last month. Which was really, again, wonderful for any journalist to read, any communicator to read about his kind of thoughts and views of AI. And it's also widely anticipated to be the topic of his first encyclical, which is expected soon. So what do you find that's interesting that he's saying on AI, and do you find that it's interesting that he's talking about it at all?
Well, that relates to one of the things that I said at the beginning about him being a pope of his generation, right? This is a post-war pope. He grew up in the 70s, went to college, studied mathematics. I mean, he probably has a better understanding of AI and computer science than most of us, right? I mean, a technical understanding of it, and it's probably something that fascinates him from an intellectual point of view, as well as concerns him as a pastor of souls, right? It's something that he can actually he's knowledgeable about. I would guess, right? So in that sense, I think we're again, I hope that it's the Holy Spirit that's behind this, giving us a pope who really has an inside understanding of modern technology and the consequences, above all for communication. I mean, I think I mentioned that his papacy is a linguistic phenomenon, right? In a certain sense, talking about the languages that he speaks with ease. I think we haven't really seen the full extent of that yet because he hasn't traveled that much. But I think when you get, I mean, we saw in Rome with the Jubilee for the youth, right? There were moments where he was switching from Italian to English to Spanish in the course of a minute, right? And perfectly in sync, without missing a beat. And it's going to be very interesting to see when he goes to Latin America or Spain or the United States or Nigeria or some places of English and Spanish background. Well, he'll be, I think, a real dynamo in those contexts. One of the things in that speech to the diplomats, again, he talked about language. I don't know if you recall. There's a section about language. I pulled it up. He says we need to engage in dialogue, At the same time, in order to engage in dialogue, there needs to be an agreement on the words and concepts that are used. Rediscovering the meaning of words is perhaps the primary challenge of our time. Like, rediscovering the meaning of words is one of the primary challenges of our time. And this is to the diplomats, right? I mean, these are striking things. And it goes on that there's actually two whole paragraphs about the importance of clarity of language and the connection to the truth, right? And the abuse of language that we're seeing for propaganda purposes, and it's very striking that he's putting that amount of stress on this precisely, and to a group of people who are concerned with world peace and the diplomatic corps. So I think seeing the AI and language issues is looking at those with a critical and somewhat expert eye. I would think probably this is my hunch, but it may have something to do with his Augustinian background. Because if you think about it, Augustine was a professor of rhetoric, right?
Mm.
And the Pope is very sensitive to the means of persuasion, modern communication, right? And one of the texts that I think is most interesting that I've seen of Leo was long before he was Pope, even before he was bishop, at the Synod of Evangelization in 2012, where he gave a talk at the Synod, which was then turned into a video thanks to Frank Roca and Robert Duncan here. They had him read it, read his intervention, and they filmed him doing it again. It's so good. And if people haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. The 2012 Synod Prevost, he's Father Bob Prevost. He was the head of the Augustinians at that point, right? I believe. In that he says, in the contemporary Western world, if not throughout the entire world, the human imagination concerning both religious faith and ethics is largely shaped by mass media, especially television and cinema, right? Western mass media is extraordinarily effective in fostering within the general public enormous sympathy for beliefs and practices that are at odds with the gospel. And he says, for example, abortion, homosexual lifestyles, euthanasia. He has a very critical approach to modern communications. And I think that's one of the interesting things that he says there, again, getting back to the importance of rhetoric. He talks about the fathers of the church. This is why I think it's actually coming from St. Augustine, right? He talks about the great fathers of the church who were all of them great orators, right? He says they were not great rhetoricians insofar as they were great preachers. Rather, they were great preachers because they were first great rhetoricians. In other words, their evangelizing, he says, was successful in great part because they understood the foundations of social communication appropriate to the world in which they lived. Consequently, they understood with enormous precision the techniques through which popular religious and ethical imaginations of their day were manipulated by centers of secular power in that world. And he's obviously talking about today's world. He's saying, but he's relating it to the fourth century, essentially. St. Augustine, Chrysostom, Ambrose, Leo the Great, Gregory of Nyssa. The fathers of the church are alive for him, and they speak to us today. Now he is looking at the world, our world, and he's looking at AI, right? But I think it's the same mentality of the appreciation for the power of the word and persuasion and manipulation. Obviously, the danger of manipulation.
I think it also, I mean, I love that. I'm going to be chewing on that for a while. And I think you're onto something. And I also think, when he speaks about language and rhetoric, it also drives back to his unification part of the program, right? His unity. You can't have unity if you don't
Right.
speak a common language. You
Can't have dialogue.
You
Yeah.
can't have dialogue. You
Exactly.
can't understand one another. And so just getting to back to the basics of being able to have common
who
language.
he quotes there is St. Augustine saying, if we don't have we're like two animals. We don't have two dumb animals looking at each other and they can't say anything. That's a very graphic image. That's the world today where we don't have a common, agreement of what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Can't define what is a woman, right? Which is, in the United States, we're facing that, well, what is a woman? We don't know what it is. We don't know what we're talking about. We can't agree on it.
Yes. Yes.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. What is a
Exactly.
human life? If you don't know what a human life is, if you don't know what a woman is, if you don't know what a family is, do you actually have a political society at all? I'm not sure.
Mm. Yeah.
And what is that society based on, right? If you don't have a common opinion about who belongs to it,
Yeah.
right? Who is a member of this family?
Mm. Yep.
Yeah. Anyway.
No, it's very true, and so much good stuff for us to think about. I want to talk too because the webinar is about the North American and South American Pope.
Yeah.
So we have a Pope who was born in Chicago, and then who as you say, grew up listening to rock and roll, went to Villanova, and then he traveled the world, but he also lived in Peru, and it's dual citizenship and was very formed, I believe, by his time there in South America. And so I want to just have a little conversation too about that. What
Yeah.
perspective how does that affect this papacy, that time there among those people? I mean, when he came out on the day he was elected, he greeted the people of his former diocese. He didn't speak
Right.
English, but he
Spoke
said hello
Spanish.
to the
Yeah.
yes, exactly. Exactly. So, he clearly has a deep affinity and connection with that community of believers, and I'd love to hear how you think it's going to influence its papacy.
Well, that's obviously huge, and I think the sense, here in Rome, even talking with Romans, Italians, is that most of them, I don't think, see him as being an American. It's not really clear what he is, right? I think Cardinal Dolan said it when he was talking about the conclave, that the American cardinals didn't think of him as one of them. That wasn't on their mind as like the American cardinals. Oh yeah, and then there's Prevost, right? He is a unique creature. At the same time, he's very American. There's elements of it. I mean, of his background of the White Sox or whatever. He's clearly American, but he doesn't come across that way. Partly because his Spanish and his Italian are quite good. He doesn't even speak with a strong accent, right? Which is quite remarkable. But what I think he has, thanks to his spending so much time outside of the United States, right, is he understands the US from inside. He is an American. He understands the language, the feel of American culture, the feel of American politics, and how people think, right, in the United States. But he also has a sense of how America is seen from the outside. He understands the US from the outside, right? Which is not something that all Americans can say because they understand it from the inside. It's the natural thing. Obviously, since the United States is the most powerful country in the world these days, it's really important to understand the United States well. And it's not enough to be American. Because to understand the United States in the world is to understand it also from the outside, I think. And so he has, from the outside, we could say he has a critical distance, right? He can understand, sympathize, right, with the United States. He clearly maintained lots of contact with the United States. At the same time, he's able to step back and say, well, that's not how it's necessarily seen from the outside. The rest of the world isn't reading the same thing that maybe in the United States, this should be obvious, right? Well, it's not obvious to large parts of the world. So I think having that inside and outside understanding of the US is key. And then above all, having an inside understanding of Latin America, which is such a huge part of the Catholic world, a huge and important part of the Catholic world that he can speak with authority about and with sympathy to is a tremendous advantage for him. So you have North America and South America uh, being at home essentially in both of those places, but having also that distance. He can see Latin America from the outside as well, and he can see the United States from the outside as well. So it's a tremendous perspective, I would say.
Yes. And for Pope Francis, it was sometimes a criticism of people in the States would say, well,
Yeah.
he just doesn't understand us. He doesn't understand what it is to be American or North American from the
Yeah.
United States. And you just can't get it.
People
You
got
can't.
people got that vibe that he's never been here.
Yes.
They felt that, right? He doesn't has the feel for the whereas Leo has the feel of Peru certainly, and also the feel for the United States.
Mhm.
It's hard to pick that up if you don't spend significant amount of time in a place, and so it's not surprising that Pope Francis wouldn't have a feel for American culture, right? You'd have to spend a lot of time there to do that. I've been in Italy 31 years. I don't think I have can claim to have the feel for Italy even. And
You give a great rooftop tour, though.
certainly enough for the Italian politics, right?
What are you looking forward to about the next few months? I mean, coming up here in 3 months, it's going to be a year since his election.
Well,
What are you looking forward to? What do
well,
you
I
see?
mean, I think, we're about to see the papacy begin. At least that's a common feeling in Rome is that the papacy has really not begun or just began in January, really, after the Jubilee year, because Pope Leo was elected in the Jubilee year, which belonged to Pope Francis, right? The papal program for the last year was already written by Pope Francis, and he stepped into the Jubilee year and fulfilled, I think, very well his duties and lived in continuity with Pope Francis and all in an admirable way, right? But the fact that he had that consistory, like the day after the Jubilee year ended, he had all the cardinals in the world come to Rome, and we're going to see in the next, year probably a bunch of appointments, right? We haven't seen the turnover yet, but we all know that there's quite a few cardinals, heads of dicasteries who are past retirement age, right? There's Cardinal Czerny, right, in integral human development, who's already 79, right? Not 75, he's 79. And the causes for saints, Semeraro is 78. Kevin Farrell is also 78, and the laity, these are big dicasteries too. Arthur Roach and Sacraments and Worship, Culto Divino, is about to be 76 if he's not already, as is Kurt Koch and Unity of Christians. There's a number of other ones, including the Dicastery of the Clergy, which is another very important and big dicastery. Lazaro Yu, right? He's 74, so he'll be turning 75, next year. So the world in Rome is going to change necessarily because of age, essentially. There's going to be a changing of the guard, and I think that is something to look forward to, just to see the identity that the papacy takes on as he names his own choices, right?
Mm.
Something else that I think will be revealing in terms of where he's headed, obviously, are the trips. He's going to start traveling, right? And he's not going to go to the U.S. yet, but he will be making other major trips, and I think we're going to see a lot more of his personality and get to know him better, right? In the months ahead. Those are things I think we should look forward to. I think it's also maybe this is a sort of broader consideration, but when we think about the papacy, we think about the Pope. What's the Pope's program? What are his plans? What are his objectives and all? I'm not sure that that's really the right way to look at it. And I'm not sure that he does. I'd be interested to talk to him and ask him, because there's a tendency, I think, to see the papacy in political terms. And, a politician has an agenda and he has a program that he's supposed to carry out. He made promises. When he was elected, he has to fulfill those promises. Pope Leo didn't make any promises to an electorate or something like, this is what I have to do, right? What does a pope have to do? Feed my sheep, I think is what Jesus says to Peter. Feed my sheep, or when you return, strengthen your brethren, right? And they're gonna have crises, right? And you need to strengthen the faith of your brethren. That's essentially the program for the papacy, right? I would say. And those two things are a tall order for a church of 1 billion people, right? Just doing that is enormous, right? Then to have, to talk about sort of a program, I'm not so sure. I mean, unity, yeah. And obviously the sacraments, talking about Jesus Christ, evangelization. I mean, those things are all enormous tasks, right? To communicate the faith to the next generation, just to hand on the faith is a huge task that we're not doing terribly well. Obviously, the churches in many places are empty and people are ignorant of the faith, the younger generations. There's so much basic work to do. I'm not certain, how much sense it makes to talk about, papal programs for reform of the church and things like that. Plus, the meat and potatoes stuff is already a lot to do, right?
Yeah, he's just doing what a pope does, right? Just doing the job. And I
Yeah.
think we've really seen him kind of step into that and just kind of wear, I mean, he referred to it himself as a cross, and it is. I mean,
Yeah.
it is the cross of the papacy. It is a challenge to undertake these massive responsibility for the souls of Catholics around the world.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think that perspective is very important for us to keep. In America, we always love to put things through the political lenses, and that's how we get into this, the mess that we're in, is that
Yeah.
you cannot view the church through a political lens. It does not work that way, and I think and Pope Leo is showing that you can't view me through a political lens either. That's not how
Yeah.
I'm acting. That's not what I'm trying to represent here.
Yeah. So far, I think he's resisted being labeled pretty well in a good sense. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. He was, again, for journalists, I think we could talk about a little bit about access. Obviously, Pope Leo gave that great interview to Elise Ann Allen that we all read several months
Yeah.
ago. And then, he's going, which I think is wonderful for his own health and sanity, once a week to Castle Gandolfo when he can manage it, to kind of get away from
Yeah.
inside the Vatican, to get
Every
outside the walls.
Tuesday.
Fantastic to go and exercise and just have some privacy and some rest. I think is a great example for all of us. But he was also doing those evening press gaggles for a while, or intermittently. I think they're standing outside the walls of Casa Gandolfo. There was
Right.
a press group waiting with cameras and microphones, and
I think
that's kind of
the
tamped
weather
down.
has something to do with the downturn in that, right? It's been cold and rainy in Rome, and people aren't standing for hours outside the door anymore.
Yeah, but it was also giving some really unique access points for
Oh yeah,
journalists.
yeah. If you want to say hi to the Pope, that's the place to do it.
Yes,
Go out to
yes.
Castel Gandolfo and stand in the door.
That's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
So I think there's always an opportunity to kind of see what his relationship with journalists is going to be, and how he's going to communicate with us. And it's exciting to see the papal plane. How is he going to handle those
Yeah.
conversations? And we've seen a little bit of that from his travels. And as you mentioned, his travels are going to ramp up here in 2026, and so we're going to be able to see more opportunities for that.
Interaction. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. You mentioned too, young people. Pope Leo seems to have such a love for the youth. I mean, he really, you mentioned the Jubilee of young people, which was
Yeah.
dynamic and interesting, and those people,
Yeah.
young people, got to ask questions, and he answered them. And then here in the States, there was a wonderful interaction with members at a youth conference in Indianapolis a couple of months ago, where
Right.
he
Yeah.
live streamed in and just had an incredible exchange with the young people, where he was making jokes and, clearly just really wanting to engage. And I think that audience was enraptured just with the conversation. So
Yeah,
I,
that's why I say we've only seen the tip of the iceberg in terms of his communication skills and language, relatability. That's all to come, I think.
yes, and just his engagement of young people he seems to really have a heart for that demographic. So I would love to hear, what you think on that. Like, what are we seeing that's really reaching out to them in a particular way? And what's
No,
this?
I have essentially the same data that you have, right? The audiences or the Jubilee for the youth, and it was obvious, right? His ability to connect with the young people, and as I say, we're gonna see that. And I think it'll be really interesting to see that in Spanish as well when he goes to Peru and he goes back to people that he's known for a long time and see a human side of him that he's kept pretty under wraps. Not that he's hiding it, but he's not making a show of that side of his personality. But it'll be on display, I think, when he gets out on these trips, these pastoral trips. Again, something to look forward to.
Yes, I think so. And especially you said his trip to Peru, which is expected later this year. Not the United States, but we'll continue to hope maybe
Right.
2027. But I don't blame him. I think I understand probably why he is, choosing to go to other places first. And this morning, there was a list of cities in Italy that was released that Pope Leo is going to be traveling to in 2026. So he's going to be doing some domestic touring as well,
Right.
and including to Pavia, where St. Augustine is
Of
buried.
course.
So we're going
Right.
to see those and Lampedusa, of course, where Pope Francis went and really put the spotlight on many years ago. So we're seeing some really interesting continuity with the past, and also, embracing further of the Augustinian tradition. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing some of those trips play out
Now
locally.
that will put Pavia on the map. Most people don't, tourists when they come to Italy, there's so many other places to see, but Pavia is particularly important. I mean, that most people don't know that Saint Augustine is buried there. You don't associate Augustine with Pavia. You associate it with North Africa, but he was there. Then he was buried in Sardinia for a while, and now he's in Pavia in the same church, by the way, with Boethius, right? The author of the Consolation of Philosophy. In the same church, there's the tomb of Boethius and Saint Augustine in Pavia. It's like amazing. So I say his trip will do a great service for that. Kind of the same way his restoration, we could say, of Castel Gandolfo has, because for the last 13 years or so, the Castel Gandolfo has been a little bit of a ghost town because Pope Francis didn't go out there, and of course the Pope was like the main reason that Castel Gandolfo exists, right? And now that he's going there regularly, it's bringing back life and even the economy of Castel Gandolfo.
Yes, I was there just a couple of months ago, and it was really beautiful to see. The town was, excited. The people there are excited, and
And
um,
the church is an Augustinian church. The church is dedicated to Thomas of Villanova. The church in the square is dedicated to Saint Thomas of Villanova, which is an amazing coincidence, right? So,
it's-
not the Villanova in Pennsylvania.
well, thank you for this wonderful conversation. It's just
My
been
pleasure.
fascinating to
Delightful.
chat with you, and really looking forward to getting to watch this papacy unfold over the next, hopefully, many years. And
Yeah,
and for right now, I'd like to pass the microphone back to Daniel. And I think we have a couple of questions that have
great.
come in from the audience.
Wonderful.
Sure. Thank you so much for both of you, John and Gretchen, for this wonderful talk. I'm just going to mention a couple of questions that have arrived to the chat from Susana Pinto. Therefore, Father John, maybe if you want to complete, Gretchen also will be happy to.
From another Chicagoan.
Exactly. So the first one says this: in his apparent role as unifier, and given his temperament and how he's handled his previous major roles, do you see him, Pope Leo, taking a stand on controversial issues within the Church and beyond? For example, the TLM in the US or IVF and surrogacy transgender issue, which many Western nations are grappling with? It's a very broad question, but it is essentially the stand, if he will be really entering into controversial issues like these ones or other issues that in the US are really a difficult and controversial topics, no? And there is another question, I put them both together so you can answer one after the others. Do you think that the Western media is handling coverage of his papacy so far? How are they covering it, no? Handling it? Many argue that they cover Francis in a biased fashion. Are they doing better in your view? Maybe less political? Maybe Gretchen, if you can say something on this last question will be good.
Yeah, maybe I'll leave that to Gretchen. The first question about controversial issues. I mean, in a way, I would say, and I would hope, but I also suspect that it's true, partly basing myself on those words that I read actually in the conversation from that talk that he gave before he was a bishop, right? Which I think is important because it gives you a sense of how his mind works, right? Before he's in the spotlight in terms of I'm the bishop or I'm the pope and everyone's looking to me and I have to manage what I say, right? This was a talk in a synod that wasn't going to get a lot of attention, and what he said was very explicit about the media manipulation of controversial ethical issues like abortion, euthanasia, homosexual lifestyles. He named the names, so to speak, and that's it. So I suspect that for him, unity doesn't mean avoiding difficult questions, right? In fact, the unity is around the teaching of the church. The teaching of the church is a source of unity around which you can unite, right? Otherwise, there's nothing to unite us, right? And I think that taking a clear stand is actually a unifying strategy, right? When lack of clarity seems comfortable sometimes, but it doesn't actually unify people, right? It allows people to be disunited, right? And unsure about what they really believe, what they should believe, etc. And so I think clarity, even the motto of the Pope, in illo uno unum, right? It's in that one we are one, right? The source of unity is Christ, right? And you can't really compromise. That's what we're here for, right? As a church, right? And the teachings of the church on, say, controversial, moral issues, are also part of that unity, right? I think one doctrine, one faith, one baptism, right? These are ideas that certainly St. Augustine would have understood, and I think the Pope does just as well.
Gretchen?
Yes, so the Western media question is an interesting one. Speaking from the perspective of the United States, he's a Chicago boy. So the media here in the US is delighted. And I was flying through O'Hare Airport a couple of months ago, and there he is on the cover of Air Chicago. So it's just, these are the types of cultural references we're seeing now here in the States because we have an American Pope. And as much as Peru is claiming him as a Peruvian Pope, where the US, of course, is claiming him as the Pope from the United States, So, I think that that there's a lot of delight over that and still a lot to be uncovered. He's quieter. He's a quieter pope, so we're not then pope, certainly as compared to his predecessor. So we're not seeing a lot of kind of off the cuff statements that kind of became constant with Pope Francis. You're not seeing that type of coverage in the States, but I think again, which because of how Leo's handling the media, I think that goes again to his emphasis on unity and just trying to kind of not on himself, on the church, like turning the lens away from the person and looking really at the teachings. But I also think what's interesting here in the States is that there are media outlets and there are also people who, especially the first 3 to 6 months of his papacy, but still are examining every little thing to try to see, aha, this is where Pope Leo stands on this, or because he's doing this, or oh yes, this is where he's going to stand on the Latin Mass, or this is where he's going to stand on, what have you, because he has shown this gesture or done this thing. And I think that because people are looking at every little thing, they're trying to put Leo within that political lens that we were talking about, in that ideological lens. And I think Leo is just adamantly saying, that is not where I'm coming from. This is not my perspective. My perspective comes from the heart of the church, from the heart of the magisterium. And I'm a Catholic. And so I'm not going to fall prey to kind of those different media or ideological emphases. So I think that's really what we're seeing, and I think he's smart to do so.
Great, thank you so much. Well, certainly there are many ideas and tips that you gave us, considering that this Pope is quieter, no? You said more quiet than Pope Francis. At the beginning, journalists covering Pope Francis had the news, no? The headlines were immediate, no? And certainly in this case, we have to do a particular effort, no? Really to cover this papacy and make it at the same time going deep, no? And not just focusing on the surface. No? And this is something that with this webinar we have tried to just scratch the surface and show that the possibilities are so many. And we hope that in the September seminar, those of you who will participate will have an opportunity to really go in deep in this knowledge of Pope Francis, Pope Leo, and this new papacy. Well, before finishing, I would like maybe to ask, keep in mind that there are many people behind the scenes, helping in not only in this webinar but also in the September presential seminar. Daniele and Raven, Diego are there. If you want to say hello, at least with your face, so people can see you before we finish this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us and for helping on this program. And thank you, Diego, also for being here with us. I will ask Raven to, of course, I want to thank Gretchen and Father John for the time and for the insights and the ideas that you gave us. I will ask Raven maybe to share again the screen with the announcement of the seminar in September, so everybody can see it, considering that you have all the information on the website, churchcommunication.net. The registrations are open from today, so please go ahead in registering. Certainly, there will be a selection because this is a very small program, but we are really grateful if you want to apply. So we'll put also, just so you know, we'll put this webinar online in a few days in the website, so everybody who couldn't follow the whole seminar or is interested in reviewing some parts, we can follow it online, and that will be on the website of the seminar. So thank you so much for everything. We'll finish now the registration, and we'll hope to see you in Rome or in another place soon. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thanks.